The afternoon sun beat down on the Carter family's backyard as children ran between colorful balloons and streamers. Jamal Carter stood near the grill, occasionally flipping burgers while watching his son Malik's birthday celebration unfold. The sound system pumped out contemporary R&B, not too loud but enough to keep the energy flowing. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and close family friends filled their modest suburban backyard, creating the kind of warm atmosphere that defined Carter family gatherings. Several teenagers clustered around the basketball hoop at the edge of the driveway, taking turns shooting hoops between plates of food. The younger kids had set up an impromptu dance competition near the patio, their laughter mixing with the music. Lisa, Jamal's wife, moved between groups of guests, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink, her natural hosting abilities on full display. Jamal checked his phone briefly, still getting notifications from his new FBI email account. After years of hard work, he'd finally achieved his dream job, and tomorrow would be his first official day. The timing of Malik's birthday party couldn't have been better, a perfect celebration of both milestones. From his position at the grill, Jamal noticed movement at the house next door. Mr. Jenkins, their neighbor of 5 years, stood on his porch, phone in hand. The older man's stance was rigid, his free hand clenching the porch railing as he spoke into the phone. Jamal had always sensed tension from Jenkins, but today something felt different. The neighbor's eyes darted between various party guests, his expression growing increasingly agitated. Within 20 minutes, the first police cruiser pulled up quietly at the end of the street. Jamal noticed it before anyone else did, his new law enforcement training kicking in. 2 more patrol cars arrived shortly after, their presence starting to draw attention from the party guests. The music continued playing, but the atmosphere shifted as people began to notice the growing police presence. The officers approached methodically, spreading out as they entered the property. Their hands weren't on their weapons, but their posture communicated clear tension. The lead officer, a sergeant based on his insignia, raised his voice over the music. "We've received complaints about suspicious activity at this address." Jamal stepped forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He'd trained for situations like this, though he never expected to use those skills at his son's birthday party. The music cut out abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence broken only by murmured conversations and the sound of confused children being gathered by their parents. "Officers, this is a family birthday party," Jamal stated clearly, maintaining eye contact with the sergeant. "My son just turned 16. He gestured toward Malik, who stood frozen near the basketball hoop, still holding the ball. Behind the officers, Mr. Jenkins had moved to the edge of his property, watching the scene unfold with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something else, perhaps uncertainty as the scale of his actions became clear. The police officers' body language remained tense as they scanned the crowd, clearly trying to reconcile the scene before them with whatever report had brought them there. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Years of community tension, prejudice, and misunderstanding converged in this single moment, threatening to transform a day of celebration into something far more serious. Jamal could feel the weight of every eye on him, both his family's and the officers, as he prepared to navigate this unexpected confrontation. Lisa Carter's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the younger children, directing them inside the house. Her teacher's instincts kicked in, maintaining a calm demeanor despite her racing heart. Through the sliding glass door, she could see Jamal reaching for his wallet, his movements deliberately slow and measured. The birthday cake sat untouched on the outdoor table, its "Happy Birthday Malik" inscription a stark reminder of how quickly joy could turn to tension. "Everyone inside, please," Lisa called out, her voice steady despite her anxiety. "Auntie Marie, could you help get the little one settled in the living room?" The family matriarch immediately took charge of the younger children, while teenagers huddled near the windows, phones in hand, unsure whether to record or hide. Outside, Jamal produced his FBI credentials, holding them up for the sergeant's inspection. "I'm Special Agent Jamal Carter. Today's my son's 16th birthday party. Nothing suspicious is happening here." The sergeant examined the credentials with obvious surprise, while his fellow officers exchanged uncertain glances. The revelation created a new kind of tension, law enforcement confronting law enforcement, with racial dynamics hanging heavy in the air. Lisa watched as one of the younger officers spoke into his radio, presumably verifying Jamal's credentials. The delay felt eternal. Through the window, she could see Mr. Jenkins still watching from his property, his phone now recording the scene. The sight made her blood boil, but she focused on keeping the children calm and occupied. Malik, their birthday boy, stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression a mix of anger and determination. He'd been saving for months to buy his camera equipment, dreaming of becoming a documentary filmmaker. Now, with trembling hands, he retrieved his camera from his room. "Mom," he whispered, "this is important. People need to see this." Lisa wanted to stop him, to protect him from what was unfolding, but she recognized the look in his eyes, the same determination she'd seen in Jamal's eyes when he decided to join the FBI. "Be careful," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay inside and film through the window." Outside, the situation grew more complex as additional neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the police presence. Some began filming with their phones, while others watched with expressions ranging from concern to judgment. The officers continued questioning Jamal about the party, their inquiries becoming increasingly pointed about the number of guests and the purpose of the gathering. Lisa's phone buzzed with incoming messages from concerned family members who'd left earlier. The party had been winding down when the police arrived, but news traveled fast in their community. She saw messages of support, offers of help, and expressions of outrage at the situation. One message caught her eye, a neighborhood watch alert about suspicious gathering with loud music, undoubtedly posted by Mr. Jenkins. Through his camera viewfinder, Malik captured everything: his father's dignified responses to questioning, the officers' shifting body language as they realized their mistake, Mr. Jenkins' continued surveillance from his property, and the gathering crowd of neighbors. The teenager's hands had stopped shaking, his focus now entirely on documenting this moment that had transformed his birthday celebration into something far more significant. Lisa moved between comforting the younger children and watching the scene unfold, her mind already racing with thoughts of community meetings, school board discussions, and the necessary conversations that would follow this incident. She'd spent years teaching her students about civil rights history, now her family was living it, right in their own backyard. The tension showed no signs of dissipating as the officers huddled together, presumably discussing their next steps. Lisa could see the strain in Jamal's shoulders as he maintained his professional demeanor, even while being treated as a suspect at his own son's birthday party. The cake continued to sit untouched on the table, its frosting beginning to melt in the afternoon sun, a poignant symbol of celebration interrupted by prejudice. The living room of the Carter home felt different that evening. Where hours earlier it had buzzed with birthday celebrations, now it held a heavy silence broken only by occasional sighs and the soft clicking of Malik's camera as he reviewed his footage. The remnants of the party, deflating balloons and half-eaten cake, seemed to mock the day's turn of events. Jamal sat in his favorite armchair, still wearing his party clothes, his FBI badge placed deliberately on the coffee table. He looked at his family gathered around him, Lisa perched on the sofa's edge, Malik cross-legged on the floor with his camera, and their younger daughter Sarah curled up against her mother. The wall clock ticked past 8 p.m., marking nearly 4 hours since the police incident. "What happened today," Jamal began, his voice steady but tired, "isn't just about us. It's about every family that's ever had their joy interrupted by prejudice. Every celebration cut short by suspicion." He picked up his badge, turning it over in his hands. "Tomorrow, I start my job protecting people. Today showed me exactly why that matters." Lisa leaned forward, her teacher's notebook already open. "We need to do more than just be angry," she said, pen poised to write. "This neighborhood has been changing for years, but some attitudes haven't changed with it. We need to address this head-on." She began listing names of neighbors who had shown support during the incident, potential allies in what they all knew would become a larger fight. Malik looked up from his camera's display. "I got everything, Dad. The way they approached us, how Mr. Jenkins was watching, even how some of the neighbors came out to support us. It's all here." He paused, then added, "I want to interview other families too. I bet we're not the only ones who've dealt with this." The suggestion sparked a longer discussion about community engagement. Lisa shared stories from her teaching experience, incidents of discrimination she'd witnessed or heard about from her students' families. Jamal spoke about the importance of documentation and proper channels for addressing systemic issues. Even young Sarah contributed, mentioning how some of her friends had similar experiences but were afraid to speak up. As the evening progressed, their living room transformed into a war room of sorts. Lisa's notebook filled with action items, organizing a community meeting at the local library, reaching out to civil rights organizations, connecting with other families who might have experienced similar treatment. Jamal made calls to colleagues in law enforcement and civil rights divisions, seeking advice on how to address the situation professionally and effectively. Malik set up his filming equipment in the corner of the room, beginning what would become his first serious documentary project. He interviewed each family member, capturing their raw emotions and reflections on the day's events. His questions showed a maturity beyond his 16 years. How did it feel to see Dad being questioned at my birthday party? What do you think Mr. Jenkins was trying to achieve? How can we turn this into something positive for our community? The impromptu family meeting lasted well into the night. Neighbors called and texted, sharing their own stories of discrimination and offering support. Lisa started a group chat for concerned community members, which quickly grew to include dozens of participants. Through social media, they discovered other incidents involving Mr. Jenkins, complaints about other families of color, calls to police about suspicious activities that turned out to be ordinary family gatherings. As midnight approached, the family had developed a clear action plan. Jamal would document the incident officially through proper channels at work. Lisa would organize the community meeting and reach out to her contacts in local education and activism circles. Malik would continue his documentation project, expanding it to include interviews with neighbors and community leaders. Even Sarah volunteered to share their story at her school's upcoming Cultural Awareness Day. The house finally quieted, but the energy of purpose remained. What had begun as a birthday party had evolved into something larger, a catalyst for change in their community. As the family prepared for bed, they knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they faced them with a united front and a clear mission. The interrupted celebration had sparked something stronger than cake and presents could provide, a family's determination to fight for justice and understanding in their community. Monday morning found Jamal at his desk in the FBI field office, his first official day overshadowed by the weekend's events. His new colleagues watched with mixed expressions as he methodically entered Mr. Jenkins' information into the database. The screen filled with a surprising pattern, dozens of complaints filed over the past decade, all targeting families of color in various neighborhoods. Carter, his supervisor, Agent Thompson, called from the doorway. "Got a minute?" In the privacy of Thompson's office, Jamal laid out the weekend's events, keeping his tone professional despite the personal nature of the incident. Thompson's expression grew increasingly grave as Jamal revealed the pattern of harassment. "This isn't just about a ruined birthday party," Thompson noted, reviewing the files. "We're looking at potential civil rights violations. Multiple incidents, documented patterns of behavior, systematic targeting of specific groups." He paused, considering. "But you'll need to recuse yourself from any official investigation, given your personal involvement." Meanwhile, at the community center, Lisa faced her own challenges. The hastily organized meeting drew an unexpectedly large crowd, filling the main hall to capacity. Faces both familiar and new packed the rows of chairs, but the atmosphere crackled with tension. Mr. Jenkins sat in the back row, flanked by a small group of supporters. "We're here to discuss recent events and ongoing concerns about discrimination in our community," Lisa began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room. She'd barely finished her introduction when the interruptions began. "This is ridiculous," one of Jenkins' supporters called out. "You can't cry discrimination every time someone reports suspicious activity. We have a right to feel safe in our homes." Several voices rose in angry response, but Lisa maintained control. "That's exactly why we're here, to discuss what makes something suspicious and why certain families seem to face more scrutiny than others." She gestured to a PowerPoint presentation showing statistics on local police calls and demographic data. Back at the FBI office, Jamal discovered more disturbing patterns. Mr. Jenkins' complaints weren't isolated incidents, they connected to a larger network of similar reports across multiple jurisdictions. property records showed he'd moved between 3 different neighborhoods in the past 15 years, each time following a similar pattern of harassment and complaints. As the community meeting continued, Lisa shared anonymous stories from other families who'd experienced harassment. The room grew quieter as patterns emerged, birthday parties interrupted, family gatherings questioned, children's play dates reported as suspicious gatherings. Mr. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat as more residents stood to share similar experiences. "This isn't about one incident or one person," Lisa emphasized. "This is about examining our biases and understanding their impact on our community." She introduced speakers from civil rights organizations and local law enforcement, each adding perspective to the discussion. The meeting reached a turning point when an elderly white couple stood up. "We've lived here 40 years, the woman said. "What happened at the Carter family's party, that's not what this neighborhood stands for. We need to do better." Mr. Jenkins and his supporters left the meeting early, but not before Malik captured their departures on camera. His lens caught their angry expressions, their hurried whispers, the way they glanced back at the gathering with clear disdain. As evening approached, Jamal received an urgent email from Thompson. The investigation had uncovered connections between Jenkins and several anti-integration groups from the 1990s. His pattern of moving between neighborhoods coincided with increasing diversity in each area. The day ended with both progress and new concerns. The community meeting had built solidarity among neighbors, but also highlighted deep divisions. Jamal's professional investigation revealed troubling patterns, suggesting the weekend's incident was part of a much larger issue. As he drove home, he pondered the delicate balance between his roles as FBI agent and concerned father, knowing that maintaining objectivity while fighting for justice would be his greatest challenge. Malik sat in his room, surrounded by video equipment, reviewing footage from the past week. His birthday camera had become a tool for social justice, capturing more than he'd initially imagined. On his computer screen, interviews with neighbors played out in succession, each telling similar stories of discrimination and harassment. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 streets over described how her daughter's quinceañera had been interrupted by police calls. The Kim family shared security camera footage of Mr. Jenkins photographing their house during their Lunar New Year celebration. Each interview added another layer to the pattern Malik was documenting. "Sometimes you don't realize how big something is until you start looking closer," Malik muttered, making notes in his editing software. His documentary was taking shape, Under Surveillance, a community's fight against prejudice. The working title felt heavy with responsibility. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted his editing. Lisa answered it, finding a manila envelope on the doorstep. Inside was a printed message, created from cutout magazine letters, "Back OFF or else." She immediately called Jamal at work, her hands shaking as she photographed the threat. "Don't touch it anymore," Jamal instructed over the phone. "I'm sending a team to collect it for evidence." His voice remained professional, but Lisa could hear the underlying tension. This wasn't the first threat they'd received that week. Their home security system had already captured photos of cars slowly driving by at night, their headlights off. The community's response to these intimidation attempts was unexpected. That evening, neighbors began appearing on their porches and front lawns. Mrs. Chen brought her knitting. The Rodriguez family set up lawn chairs. Mr. Peterson, a retired police officer, parked his car at the corner. Without formal organization, a neighborhood watch formed around the Carter home. Malik captured it all on camera. "This is what community looks like," he narrated, filming the impromptu gathering. "When one family is threatened, others stand up." His documentary was evolving beyond just exposing prejudice, it was now recording a community's transformation. Social media amplified their story. Local news stations picked up on the growing neighborhood solidarity. Hashtags emerged, hashtag Stand With The Carters, hashtag Community Over Hate, hashtag Watching the Watchers. Each post brought more attention, more support, and unfortunately, more threats. The anonymous messages became more frequent, photographs of Jamal at work, Lisa's teaching schedule, even Malik's school route. Each threat was documented, collected as evidence, and added to the growing FBI file. But the family refused to be intimidated. "Keep filming," Jamal told his son one evening. "But be smart about it. Don't go anywhere alone. He helped Malik set up additional cameras around their house, creating a surveillance network of their own. The irony wasn't lost on them, using the same tools of surveillance that had been used against them, but now for protection and documentation. Lisa organized a support network through her school connections. Teachers, parents, and students rallied around the cause. The threats had an unexpected effect. Instead of silencing the community, they sparked more conversation, more activism, more unity. At his editing desk, Malik worked late into the night, weaving together interviews, surveillance footage, and community responses. His 16th birthday party, the incident that started it all, now seemed like a lifetime ago. The same camera that had captured his celebration was now recording history, documenting a community's journey from fear to solidarity. The thing about watching, Malik recorded in his documentary voiceover, is that it works both ways. When they watch us with suspicion, we watch back with truth. When they try to divide us, we watch out for each other. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is make sure everyone else is watching too. His words played over footage of neighbors standing guard, of community meetings growing larger each week, of children from different backgrounds playing together on front lawns while their parents kept vigilant watch. The surveillance meant to intimidate had instead created a community of witnesses, each contributing to a larger story of resistance and unity. The community center auditorium was packed beyond capacity for the emergency town hall meeting. Jamal stood at the podium, his FBI badge visible on his belt, facing a sea of faces that reflected the neighborhood's diversity. The threats against his family had transformed a local dispute into a rallying cry for change. When my son turned 16, Jamal began, his voice steady, all he wanted was to celebrate with family and friends. Instead, he got a harsh lesson about the world we live in. But what happened next? He paused, scanning the crowd. What happened next showed us something more powerful than hate. It showed us the strength of unity. In the front row, Lisa nodded encouragingly while Malik's camera rolled. The documentary footage now included over 40 hours of interviews, surveillance clips, and community meetings. Each frame told a story of resistance and solidarity. Mr. Jenkins sat near the back, his usual supporters noticeably absent. His face had grown haggard over the past weeks as more neighbors came forward with stories. His attempts to discredit Jamal had backfired spectacularly when background checks revealed his own history of discriminatory behavior in previous neighborhoods. This isn't just about one birthday party interrupted, Jamal continued. It's about every child who's ever felt unwelcome in their own neighborhood. Every family that's had to explain to their kids why someone views their celebration as a threat. Every citizen who's had to prove they belong in their own home. The audience erupted in applause. Signs rose above the crowd, "Hate has no home here," and "United Neighbors Stand Strong." Local news cameras captured the moment, their presence ensuring the message would reach beyond these walls. Mr. Jenkins stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're turning everyone against me," he shouted. "I was just trying to protect my property values." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air, raw and revealing. Jamal's response was measured. "Property values? Let's talk about value. The value of dignity. The value of respect. The value of a community where children can celebrate birthdays without fear. Those are the values we're protecting." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Even those who had initially been hesitant to take sides found themselves on their feet. Mr. Jenkins stormed out, but few noticed his departure. The focus remained on Jamal's words and the growing sense of purpose in the room. Malik's documentary footage captured the transformation. Side-by-side interviews showed the contrast, early clips of nervous neighbors afraid to speak out, followed by recent footage of the same people organizing rallies, sharing their stories, standing guard outside threatened homes. The meeting evolved into an action planning session. Committees formed to address various aspects of community safety and inclusion. Lisa's education group would develop awareness programs for local schools. A legal team would review discriminatory housing practices. Security teams would coordinate neighborhood watch efforts. They thought surveillance would silence us, Jamal concluded. Instead, it made us vigilant. They thought threats would divide us. Instead, they united us. They thought fear would weaken us. Instead, it revealed our strength. The documentary captured the determination on every face, the sense of purpose in every raised hand volunteering for committees. Mr. Jenkins' attempt to maintain what he saw as neighborhood standards had inadvertently created something he never intended, a true community, united in purpose and commitment to change. As the meeting concluded, neighbors lingered to share stories, exchange contact information, and plan next steps. The threat letters that had arrived at the Carter home now hung on a display board, transformed from intimidation tactics into evidence of what they were fighting against. Malik's camera panned across the scene one final time, capturing the essence of community in action. His father's words had given voice to their struggle, but it was the response of everyday people that would create lasting change. The birthday party that should have been a simple celebration had become a catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the strongest communities are forged in the face of opposition. The local news van parked outside the community center marked a turning point. Sarah Martinez, an investigative reporter known for her work on discrimination cases, had picked up Malik's documentary footage through social media. What started as a local dispute had caught the attention of national civil rights organizations. Mr. Jenkins' pattern of behavior spans 3 decades, Martinez explained, reviewing documents spread across her desk. Jamal sat opposite her, now speaking as both an FBI agent and a concerned citizen. We've uncovered similar complaints in 5 different neighborhoods, always following the same pattern. The reporter's investigation revealed a disturbing timeline. Each time a neighborhood's demographics began to shift, Jenkins would escalate his surveillance and complaints. Property records showed him moving strategically, always one step ahead of the changes he fought against. But this time, he had unknowingly targeted an FBI agent's family. Agent Carter, Martinez leaned forward, our research shows Mr. Jenkins isn't working alone. We found connections to several property ownership groups with questionable practices. Would you care to comment on the broader investigation? Jamal chose his words carefully, conscious of both his professional position and personal stake. While I can't comment on ongoing investigations, I can confirm that the FBI takes civil rights violations seriously. What began as a disrupted birthday party has exposed systemic issues that demand attention. Meanwhile, at the community center, Lisa presided over a packed hearing room. Community members lined up to share their experiences, each story adding weight to the case against Jenkins. The testimonies ranged from recent incidents to decades-old grievances, painting a picture of long-term, coordinated discrimination. He photographed my grandson's graduation party, an elderly woman testified, her voice shaking. Called the police 3 times. Said we were dealing drugs. It was a high school celebration with cake and balloons. The pressure mounted as more media outlets picked up the story. Jenkins' attempts to maintain a low profile crumbled under scrutiny. Security camera footage from various neighbors showed him conducting his surveillance activities, his methodical documentation of family gatherings now working against him. The reporter's investigation uncovered emails linking Jenkins to a network of like-minded individuals who shared tactics for maintaining neighborhood standards, a euphemism for discriminatory practices. These communications dated back years, revealing coordinated efforts to discourage diverse families from settling in certain areas. The irony, Jamal noted during a community update meeting, is that every photo he took, every call he made, every complaint he filed created a paper trail. He documented his own discrimination. The FBI's broader investigation, led by Jamal's colleagues, began connecting dots between various incidents across the state. Jenkins' actions represented just one node in a larger network of housing discrimination and harassment. His meticulous record-keeping, intended to support his complaints, instead provided evidence against him. During an impromptu press conference outside his home, Jenkins attempted to defend himself. I was protecting my community, he insisted, but his words rang hollow against the mounting evidence. Former neighbors from other communities came forward, sharing similar stories of harassment and surveillance. The media attention brought unexpected allies. Civil rights attorneys offered pro bono services. Housing advocacy groups provided documentation of similar cases. Even former police officers came forward to discuss how they'd been manipulated into participating in discriminatory actions through false reports. "This isn't just about winning a fight," Jamal explained to Malik, who continued documenting everything. "It's about changing a system that allowed this to happen in the first place." The story had evolved beyond a single incident at a birthday party. It now encompassed decades of systematic discrimination, hidden behind the facade of community safety and property values. As pressure mounted, Jenkins' carefully constructed world began to crumble, revealing the true cost of prejudice, not in property values, but in human dignity and community trust. In his FBI office, Jamal stared at the documents spread across his desk, each piece adding to a disturbing puzzle. The evidence had arrived in a plain manila envelope from a former resident of Jenkins' previous neighborhood, decades of meticulous records kept by Jenkins himself, documenting his neighborhood watch activities. "He kept everything," Agent Thompson remarked, examining the files. Photos, dates, times, detailed notes about family gatherings, cultural celebrations, even children's play dates. All categorized by race and ethnicity. The obsessive detail of Jenkins' documentation revealed more than just prejudice, it showed a systematic campaign of harassment spanning years. Among the papers, they found handwritten guidelines for maintaining neighborhood character, a coded phrase that appeared repeatedly in correspondence with local real estate agents and homeowners associations. The documents revealed a network of individuals who shared information about potential home buyers and renters, specifically targeting families of color. "Look at this," Jamal pointed to a series of emails. They created a rating system for what they called demographic risk factors. They were literally scoring families based on race. The discovery sent ripples through the FBI's Civil Rights Division, prompting a wider investigation into housing discrimination practices. Meanwhile, the community's response grew stronger. The weekend march in support of the Carter family drew thousands, far exceeding expectations. People carried signs with photos of their own family celebrations, each representing a moment that should have been joyful but was marked by suspicion and surveillance. Lisa organized a Celebration of Unity event in the park, deliberately choosing the same location where Malik's birthday party had been interrupted. Families brought food from their various cultural backgrounds, creating a powerful statement through shared celebration. The local news covered it live, contrasting the joy of community with Jenkins' documented history of division. "What we found in those files," Jamal addressed the crowd, "tells a story of systematic attempts to divide us. But look around you today. This is the real story of our community." Children played together on the grass while parents shared dishes and stories, creating the very scene Jenkins had fought so hard to prevent. The evidence mounted as more people came forward. Former real estate agents confessed to participating in discriminatory practices under pressure from Jenkins and his associates. Security camera footage from multiple sources created a timeline of his surveillance activities. His own meticulous record-keeping became the foundation for legal action against him. Malik's documentary now included interviews with housing rights experts who explained the broader context of neighborhood discrimination. "What happened at my birthday party wasn't random," he narrated. "It was part of a pattern that affected countless families before us. The difference is, this time, we had the tools and support to fight back." The community began creating its own documentation system, but with a different purpose. Instead of surveillance, they recorded celebrations, cultural events, and daily moments of connection. Each photo and video became evidence of what Jenkins had tried to prevent, the natural growth of a diverse, supportive community. "This is more than just a legal case now," Lisa explained during a community meeting. "We're rewriting the narrative about what makes a neighborhood safe and valuable. It's not about keeping people out, it's about bringing people together." The discovery of Jenkins' records transformed the conversation from a local dispute to a landmark civil rights case. His detailed documentation, intended to support his discriminatory actions, instead provided a roadmap for systemic change. Each page revealed not just individual acts of prejudice, but a coordinated effort to maintain racial barriers in housing and community life. As evening fell on another community gathering, Jamal watched families sharing meals and children playing together. The evidence they'd uncovered told one story, of division, suspicion, and calculated discrimination. But the scene before him told another, of resilience, unity, and the power of standing together against prejudice. The morning fog hadn't yet lifted when Mr. Jenkins appeared on the Carters' front lawn. His appearance had deteriorated, his usually pristine clothing rumpled, his face haggard from weeks of mounting pressure. Security cameras captured his approach, and neighbors immediately began texting the family support network. "You've destroyed everything I built," Jenkins shouted at the house, his voice cracking. 30 years of protecting our standards, gone because you couldn't just keep quiet. Inside, Jamal motioned for Lisa to take the kids upstairs while he contacted local law enforcement. Malik, refusing to retreat, set up his camera near the window. "This is important," he whispered to his mother. "People need to see the real face of hate." Through his lens, he captured Jenkins' transformation from respected neighbor to exposed antagonist. Jamal stepped onto the porch, his FBI badge visible but his hands clearly empty. "Mr. Jenkins, you need to leave my property." His voice remained professional, even as Jenkins advanced up the walkway. "You think you've won?" Jenkins spat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. We've kept these neighborhoods in line for decades. One uppity FBI agent isn't going to change that." The slur hung in the air, captured clearly on multiple devices as neighbors recorded from their windows. What Jenkins didn't know was that his outburst was being monitored by FBI surveillance teams. His words confirmed connections to a larger network of housing discrimination that the Bureau had been investigating for months. Jamal's case had provided the breakthrough they needed. "Every word you're saying is being recorded," Jamal stated calmly. "Every threat, every admission. You're not just talking to me, you're talking to federal investigators who've been building a case against your entire network." The color drained from Jenkins' face as police cruisers silently pulled up behind him. His decades of careful manipulation crumbled in a moment of uncontrolled rage. Through Malik's camera, the scene unfolded like a climactic moment in a film, the confrontation between calculated discrimination and unwavering justice. "You've got it all wrong," Jenkins attempted to backtrack, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I was protecting property values. Maintaining community standards. That's not illegal." "Standards?" Jamal stepped forward. "Let's talk about your standards. We found your files, Jenkins. Every photo, every note, every email coordinating with real estate agents to keep families out. 30 years of documented discrimination. Those aren't community standards, that's organized harassment." The FBI's investigation had uncovered a sophisticated network. Jenkins wasn't just a prejudiced neighbor, he was a key coordinator in a system designed to maintain racial barriers in housing. His meticulous records had exposed connections to discriminatory lending practices, real estate steering, and coordinated harassment campaigns. As police officers approached, Jenkins made one final attempt to maintain control. "You're making a mistake. I have friends in positions of power. This won't end here." "You're right about one thing," Jamal replied. "This won't end here. But not because of your friends in power. It won't end because we're finally exposing the truth about how discrimination works, not just individual acts of prejudice, but systematic, organized efforts to divide communities." The arrest was anticlimactic. Jenkins offered no resistance as officers read him his rights. Neighbors emerged from their homes, forming a silent witness to the end of his reign of surveillance and intimidation. Malik captured it all, his camera steady as he documented the culmination of weeks of community resistance. Inside the house, Lisa held Sarah close as they watched from upstairs. The morning's confrontation represented more than just Jenkins' downfall, it marked a turning point in their community's history. The invisible barriers that had shaped neighborhood dynamics for decades were finally being torn down. Jamal's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Thompson, network identified. Multiple warrants being served across 3 states. Jenkins' confession was the key we needed. The investigation had expanded far beyond their local community, exposing a coordinated system of housing discrimination that had operated in shadows for years. As police cars pulled away, neighbors spontaneously gathered on the street. What began as a confrontation had transformed into a moment of collective liberation. The community that Jenkins had tried so hard to divide stood united, witnessing the first steps toward genuine change. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Jamal presented the evidence against Jenkins and his network. The prosecution's table was covered with 30 years' worth of documented discrimination, photos, emails, surveillance logs, and financial records that revealed the scope of their operation. "Your Honor," Jamal testified, standing tall in his FBI uniform, "what began as a disrupted birthday party led us to uncover one of the largest organized housing discrimination networks in our state's history. The evidence was overwhelming: coordinated efforts across multiple neighborhoods, systematic harassment of families of color, and a complex web of real estate manipulation." In the gallery, Malik sat with his camera, documenting his father's testimony. His documentary had evolved from a simple birthday party incident into a powerful exposé that caught national attention. Major news networks had already licensed portions of his footage, and civil rights organizations were using it for training purposes. Jenkins, now in custody, sat slumped at the defendant's table as prosecutor after prosecutor presented evidence of his activities. The meticulous records he'd kept to support his discrimination had become the very tools of his undoing. His network of concerned citizens crumbled as members turned state's evidence, revealing decades of coordinated harassment. "The defendant didn't just surveil our celebrations," Lisa testified, her teacher's voice steady and clear. "He tried to surveil our dignity, our right to exist in our own community." But what he actually documented was his own prejudice, his own fear of change, his own failure to see the beauty in diversity. The verdict came swiftly. Jenkins was found guilty on multiple federal charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and harassment. His sentence would serve as a precedent for similar cases across the country. As he was led away, he looked aged and small, stripped of the power he'd wielded for so long. But the real victory celebration took place back in the neighborhood. The community gathered in the Carter's backyard, the same space where Malik's birthday party had been interrupted months earlier. This time, there was no tension, no surveillance, just the pure joy of people coming together. "Today, we're not just celebrating a legal victory," Jamal addressed the crowd. "We're celebrating the birth of a true community. One that stands together, watches out for each other, and recognizes that our differences make us stronger." Malik premiered a shortened version of his documentary on a screen set up in the yard. The footage showed their journey, from the interrupted birthday party to the final verdict. But more importantly, it showed the transformation of a neighborhood, from divided and fearful to united and strong. Lisa had already begun implementing new community integration programs through her school. "We're teaching children that diversity isn't just something to tolerate, it's something to celebrate," she explained to a group of parents. The program would soon be adopted by schools across the district. The final scenes of Malik's documentary captured the essence of their victory. Children from all backgrounds played together on front lawns that once were subject to suspicious surveillance. Families shared meals across cultural boundaries that Jenkins had tried so hard to maintain. The Neighborhood Watch program was reimagined as a community support network, ensuring that no family would ever feel unwelcome or unsafe again. Sometimes, Malik's voiceover concluded, "It takes a moment of darkness to show us where we need to shine light." What happened at my 16th birthday wasn't just about one party, one neighbor, or one family. It was about choosing what kind of community we want to be. As the sun set on their celebration, the Carter family stood together, watching their neighbors, now true friends, sharing food, laughter, and stories. The surveillance cameras that once documented suspicion now recorded joy. The community that Jenkins had tried to divide had emerged stronger, more united, and more determined to ensure that every family could celebrate without fear. Sarah, looking up at her father, asked, "Can we have another birthday party now?" Jamal smiled, embracing his family. "Every day we stand together is worth celebrating." The victory wasn't just in Jenkins' conviction or the dismantling of his network. It was in the laughter of children playing without fear, in the shared meals between neighbors of different backgrounds, and in the knowledge that when faced with prejudice, their community had chosen unity over division, love over fear, and justice over hate. The Carter family's ordeal had transformed their neighborhood into a model of community resistance and reformation, proving that the strongest communities are built not by surveillance and suspicion, but by understanding, acceptance, and the courage to stand together against injustice.